What is going on, Ape Nation? So last few days I've been playing a lot of videos for you pertaining to IEX. Now there's a reason for that. I don't know if everyone that's subscribed to the channel or that's been watching caught on to that, but I did this for a reason. I did this because of the Citadel and SEC lawsuit that's going on, which is kind of what we're going to be looking at today. We're actually going to be watching clips from the actual lawsuit. And then tomorrow what we're going to get into is I'm actually going to break everything down for you and give you my thoughts on the entire court hearing. But what I wanted you guys to do first is watch the actual hearing. I think I'm going to break it down into 3 parts. It's about an hour long. The first part is going to be hearing from Citadel Securities attorneys. So I'm going to make that this video that you're watching right now. The next video that I'll put out, probably by the time that you're done watching this one, is the SEC attorneys, their arguments for the court. And then the third part of it is IEX getting involved. In my opinion, that was probably one of the more significant ones. I didn't think that the SEC attorney did as well as she could have done. Anyhow, I've said too much. I'm trying to make this intro kind of quick, so we're going to get right into the video. But before we do, please remember to smash that like button and subscribe if you have not yet subscribed, because I drop content just like this every single day.
Citadel Securities LLC petitioner versus Securities and Exchange Commission. Mr. Wall for the petitioner, Ms. Parisi for the respondent, Ms. Stetson for the intervener for the respondent.
Good morning, Mr. Wall, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Your Honors, and may it please the court. The SEC has allowed a small for-profit exchange to interfere directly in the market in order to attract one side of that market and boost its revenues. In approving that change, the Commission committed 3 errors that independently require reversal. First, the Commission seriously misunderstood the data before it. Rather than look at particular trades, the Commission relied on misleading statistics that show a lot of trading when the signal is on. Those statistics reflect normal trading activity, not phantom arbitrage. Large orders across multiple exchanges cause prices to move, which turns on the signal. Even after Citadel submitted data showing exactly that at Joint Appendix 372, the Commission never addressed it. Second, even as
Mr. Wall, you just referred to phantom arbitrage. Do you think latency arbitrage exists?
Judge Walker, I don't think the court has to get into it. All the court needs say is that if it exists, the data here doesn't show it.
Well, but part of the argument is whether or not the algorithm and the speed bump and all of the things that IEX have done here is sufficiently tailored enough to reduce latency arbitrage. And I couldn't tell from your brief whether your client acknowledges its existence even. And if you don't acknowledge its existence, it's hard to know how you can make an argument that the algorithm and the speed bump are not sufficiently tailored.
Judge Walker, I think there's good reason to be extremely skeptical. 10, 12 years ago, sure, maybe. Now, no. Look, there are a lot of dogs that ought to be barking if this is the phenomenon that they say it is. The SEC has all the trading data in its MIDAS system, and IEX has access to the trades too. You'd think that somebody would be analyzing the actual trades to give you examples of latency arbitrage, or you'd at least have firsthand accounts of people who were saying that particular cables were shorter, or here are the firms that have the better data speeds. In fact, the amici in this case, like XTX on the other side, which is one of Citadel's competitors, has the same connectivity and data. I doubt Ms. Parisi or Ms. Stetson will tell you that they have any competitive advantage or disadvantage vis-a-vis Citadel. So I think there are good reasons to be skeptical, Judge Walker, about whether this narrative in this day and age is true. But again, I don't need the court to agree with me on that. All the court needs to say is, look, they took there to be a problem because they took these numbers and said there's a lot of trading when the signal is on. And the numbers are meaningless because it's large trades that are turning on the signal. And that's the example that we gave at page 372 of the Joint Appendix. If you look, we supplied an actual trade to IEX and the Commission and said, we sent out a large buy order across multiple exchanges because we were sweeping the market. We wanted a lot of shares of this particular stock. And IEX, because of the speed bump, looked at what was happening on all the other exchanges, correctly predicted that because there was a spike in demand, prices were going to move. It turned on the signal, and then you can't execute the last little piece in IEX. And the key part...
You can finish your sentence, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, Judge Walker, the key thing to understand is that IEX is a bit player. It only has about 2% market share. It doesn't have a lot of liquidity. There's, so to speak, there's not a lot of stuff sitting on its shelves. So if you're going, you're often going because you need a lot of something, including the last little piece at a place like IEX. And it's that last little piece that's making the signal turn on. It's got nothing to do with latency arbitrage.
Well, let me ask, IEX says in its brief that you carefully avoided telling the commission and this court two things. And so I wanted to give you the opportunity to answer them if you want to, or to confirm that Citadel would rather not. The first is this: Citadel carefully avoided telling the commission and this court how much of its trading activity, when the indicator is on behalf of retail investors.
So not true. As we explained,
so how much of your trading activity is on behalf of retail investors when the indicator is on?
So we looked at 1 month of data, and as we told them at page 313 of the joint appendix, we said more than 50% of the trades we sent you in 1 month, it's actually 56%, were retail rather than proprietary. And of those, Judge Walker, we said 15% turned on the signal because they were sufficiently large. It was the size of the order that was driving this. It had nothing to do with latency arbitrage. In response to that, here's what the commission did. It said, okay, you say we mislabeled you as proprietary when in fact you do retail. We're just going to exclude your data from the analysis.
Right, I caught that. I remember that part. Let me ask the second thing that they say you avoided telling the commission and the court. They say you did not say whether retail investors, as opposed to Citadel, benefit from routing retail orders at the moments the indicator is on.
So not true, Judge Walker, but it's the flip side. As we explained to the commission, the retail investor is harmed. We're not bundling these retail orders. There's some anonymous comment letter. It provides no support for that. We told the commission it wasn't true, and it's not true. A retail order comes in. Maybe we fill it internally if we have the volume, or we send it out to the exchange. We send it out quickly, we send it out promptly, and we do it across all the exchanges if it's a large order. Again, we gave an example at page 372 of the joint appendix. And what happens is, let me give you a really simple example just to make it concrete. Let's say you want 1,000 shares of Apple. There's 500 on the New York Stock Exchange, there's 400 on NASDAQ, and there's 100 at IEX, right? You hit the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, you get your 900 shares. IEX sees that going on. It correctly predicts that because of the spike in the demand, the price is going to move. It ticks up a cent. So for those last 100 shares, that retail investor, you wanted the 1,000 shares, you're a mutual fund, or you're investing on behalf of ordinary folks, you pay an extra $1. Their only answer to that is not to look at the retail cost. They never consider that at all. All they say in the order and then in their brief is, well, you can just reroute. But the problem, Judge Walker, is now you jump from the frying pan into the fire. If you executed IEX first for the 100 shares, it's true, you don't pay the extra $1. But you hold back the other two orders for the 900 shares. And as we told the commission, by the time you send them out, the shares may not be there, or they may not be there at that price. So you're sort of damned if you do, even more damned if you don't. And if the commission had looked at all of this in some reasoned order and said, here are the benefits and the costs, I'd grant it'd be a tougher case. But essentially, they haven't looked at any of it. They say at page 41 of their brief, you can just reroute. We come back and say, well, you said in response to the CBOE proposal that routing wasn't enough. And then they drop this footnote at page 55 to say, well, you're not going to need any material changes in routing. The brief is totally schizophrenic on it. You will need to reroute. That rerouting has costs, and the commission didn't consider those costs.
So, Mr. Wall, is your argument that are you making an argument that the SEC lacks the authority to counteract latency arbitrage? So if they had provided more reasoning or more data that they could attack this problem? Or is your argument that they just simply don't have the authority under their statute?
No, only on the second of the protected quote side, mm-hmm. They can't do what they're doing. They can't protect the quotes because it's not consistent with the language of the regulation. But on the first of the two issues, the delimit argument, no, Judge Rao, if they had come in and presented actual evidence of latency arbitrage, they presented actual trades or even firsthand accounts from people who are writing the algorithms involved, if they had some reasoned basis, and then if they had shown, look, we've isolated out the retail, we've isolated out the ISOs, the intermarket sweeps, We're still showing that we're actually picking up the arbitrage. We know that's going to impose some cost on retail investors on the liquidity taker side of the market. But here's why we think those costs are overbalanced by benefits. I mean, if they'd done what you would expect in a well-reasoned commission order, I think it's possible they could have done this. But this is just a sloppy order. It takes data, it misreads the stats, it assumes away all the costs. If you look at both the order and their brief to this court, it reads like it's all roses and no thorns. It doesn't have any consideration of the costs on retail or routing. And then just to finish up where I started, Judge Rao, at a minimum, this was the third error I was going to get to in my opening, they can't protect the quotes. The regulation says immediately and automatically executable. And the whole point of this is they're slowing it down so that it's not immediate. And then instead of automatically executing, they're automatically repricing. They're doing the exact opposite of what the regulation says. And so, no, on that side of it, they can't do this absent another notice and comment rulemaking.
So, Mr. Wall, the question of immediately, the commission claims that it should get Kaiser deference for its interpretation of immediately. And it made that interpretation in 2016 when they did the initial IEX order. So why shouldn't they get Kaiser deference in this context?
So I'd say two things, Judge Rao. First is you don't get our if the language is unambiguous. And there's the natural meaning of immediately and automatically is exactly what you'd think. No intentional delay and no intervention. And that's exactly what the contemporaneous guidance said in 2005. If you look at page 534 of the adopting release, it is almost word for word what I just said. You are right. They came back in 2016. They read in a de minimis exception that has no tie whatsoever to the regulatory text. So first, I don't think the text is ambiguous enough to allow them to do it. And two, Justice Kagan already told us in Kaiser that an agency will rarely get deference if it flipped, as it did here. And boy, this doesn't seem like a very good candidate for that at all, because when they flipped in 2016, all they talk about is the purposes of the act. They don't make any effort to tie it to the text. Even the discussion of policy is pretty thin. And then when they revisit it here in 2020, Judge Rao, and this is at the top of page 83 of the joint appendix, it's literally two sentences. And only the second sentence doesn't even work. And all it says is, we looked at this in 2016, and for the same reasons we're doing it here. Except that here they're doing it for displayed prices. This is supposed to be the prices that the market tells you the fair value is. And they never looked at whether repricing those frustrates the Exchange Act and its purposes.
Well, with Citadel, Citadel, though, didn't challenge the interpretation in 2016, did it?
Well, in all fair, not to this court, Judge Rao. We did challenge it to the commission. We put in comment letters pointing to the regulatory text. Now, but at the time, they said, we're only doing this with non-displayed. Right? The stuff you can't see that you just want to go fishing for in the dark. But we're not doing it to display prices. So we didn't petition this court for review. It wasn't until they did that here that we've come in, obviously, and brought it to this court. And at the end of the day, Judge Rao, if I'm right that they can't take advantage of power, then it's just the regulation. And what does it mean for a quotation to be immediately and automatically executable? It means you can't slow it down at the exchange. And once it hits the exchange, you can't tinker with it. That's the whole meaning of immediately and automatically. And what they've done is say, well, not immediate, but as long as it doesn't take too long that we think it frustrates the purposes of the act. And they flipped the default of automatically. They never interpreted that word. Instead of automatic execution, you get automatic repricing. It's the exact opposite of what the regulation requires. So look, we have both the frontline argument, by the way, that it's not consistent with the reg, but the fallback argument, by the way, Judge Rao, doesn't attack at all 2016 or isn't inconsistent with it. Even if this de minimis gloss can somehow be put on the regulation, they still didn't offer any reasoned basis for saying, here's why extending that to displayed prices doesn't frustrate the purposes of the Exchange Act. There's no analysis of that in the order. As I say, it's two sentences at the top of page 83, and all it does is point back to 2016, which of course never looked at this extension for displayed prices. That argument we have regardless of what one thinks about 2016.
Why would the interpretation of immediately and automatically be different for displayed versus non-displayed?
Well, I don't think it is our frontline argument. Our frontline argument is they got it wrong in 2016. Fine. They get the benefit of that for the purpose of the exchange. But if they're going to extend it, that's still the basis for their order. And this court is required by the APA to say, you've put a gloss on this that is just not consistent with the regulation. But on the fallback argument, Judge Rao, absolutely, you could easily say, well, look, even if you think repricing doesn't affect for the stuff over here in the dark that you can't see, it does very much frustrate the purpose of the Exchange Act to do it with respect to displayed liquidity, right? Because the whole idea of this protected quote system, which doesn't apply to non-displayed, it's only for displayed quotes. The whole idea is you got a best bid and a best offer, and those are driven by market forces. And once you have them, everybody's required to trade at them. You can't mess up the investor by trading at some different price than you could get on some other exchange. But the whole system, the reason you offer that insurance to the investor is because you're confident that the bid and offer are actually the best prices out there in the market, driven by market forces. Here, they're requiring us to treat these things like they're the best bid or offer on the market, when we know that when we've got a large order, we're going to get to IEX in the very last piece, and it's going to fade away from us, right? We have to treat it like it's real when we know, in fact, it's phantom. And that's at odds with the system. And if the SEC wanted to try to do it for displayed prices, it at least needs to explain why it doesn't frustrate the purposes of the act. And it didn't even try here.
Do my colleagues have, do my colleagues have any questions? I have one more question. So I guess I wanted to understand more about this question about asymmetry. So all incoming traffic has to cross over IEX's speed bump.
That's right.
That's correct, right? So it's symmetrical as to the speed bump.
Well, sorry, Judge Brown, it was for the non-displayed, right? But this automatic repricing makes it asymmetrical because you put the quotation up there, and while everybody else is trying to hit it and get through the speed bump and execute against it, they're automatically repricing during that 350 microsecond delay. So it's now asymmetric, and it hurts just the liquidity taker side of the market.
Well, but doesn't the SEC routinely approve effects? Isn't that the same difference here as it would be with other types of orders that move in that way?
So I don't think so, Judge Rao. I'm not here to tell you. Obviously, the question is whether it's unfair discrimination under the Act. Sure, there are some kinds of discrimination that are not unfair. But it seems to me if the commission wanted to justify this, we know it's discriminatory. We know it helps liquidity providers and hurts liquidity takers. I don't think anybody doubts that. So the question is just, is it unfair? And it seems to me they've got to do two things. They've got to be right, or at least fair and reasoned about the benefits, right? What they're attacking. They've got to correctly understand the problem and what they get from it. And they've got to correctly understand the costs. And here they messed up both sides, right? They took as evidence of latency arbitrage something that's just evidence of normal large trading. And then they assumed away the costs and sort of said, well, you can deal with it through routing, but not looking at the costs of rerouting, which, as I tried to explain earlier, Judge Walker, are real. So if they'd done that on both sides of the ledger, maybe, as I said to you earlier, they'd be able to get away with a proposal like this. But in no event can they protect it. They have this innovation story they want to tell. That's fine. If they're right about this, let the market decide. Liquidity providers should flock to IEX if they're right. But what they can't do is let the platform itself start monkeying around and interfering with the trades and then claim that those are protected, not without a change to their rule. Their rule says immediately and automatically. The whole idea is if you've got the best bidder offer driven by the market, you get protection. It's not driven by the market here. It's driven by a formula that the market is using to readjust the price that is the result of market forces. So if they want to do this, let them do it, but let them compete as they say they want to. Don't let them do it having interfered with the market and then claim this protectionist benefit of Rule 611.
And so your argument is that rule has to be updated through notice and comment rulemaking.
Yes.
The SEC wants to update it.
Yeah, I mean, look, if they want to say it doesn't have to be immediately and automatically executable, you can have an intentional delay and you can have intervention by the agency. It's perfectly fine. They've just got to choose different words. But again, Judge Rao, you don't have to agree with me on that, because even if I'm wrong, and there is some de minimis exception that can be read into that language, notwithstanding its natural meaning, they still here did not do what they tried to do back in 2016. They didn't say, okay, we're extending it to displayed prices. Here's why that extension doesn't frustrate the purposes of the act. They pointed back to 2016, but of course in 2016, they were never looking at displayed prices. So they've got an APA problem anywhere they go, although I will say, I think that it's more fundamental than they recognize.